My strategy pretty much from day one has been flip homes to drum up capital and then take that capital and use it as down payments on commercial multifamily, which I hold long-term in my rental portfolio. I started a little over 5 years ago, and I currently, in my house flipping business, we will probably flip between 60 to 70 houses this year, and all in the Wilmington area, Pender, New Hanover, and Brunswick. And I currently own 4 different apartment complexes totaling 60 apartment doors, and just recently bought an RV park in Surf City that, once we're finished with some infrastructure improvements, will be a total of 33 pads plus a house at the back of it. So pretty exciting stuff. I started with nothing, and really just from flipping houses have been able to generate capital to be able to purchase those commercial properties and hold them long term, which is what really all of our goals should be, is creating that long term passive income over time. That's how you really obtain freedom. So one of the ways I've done this is flipping manufactured homes. Probably, I would say a little over half of my flips are manufactured homes, single wides and double wides. And we're going to talk tonight about some of the reasons why it's a great niche to be in, why you should do it, some things you need to look for, some like title concerns, financing concerns, that kind of thing. A lot of, basically just about everything that you need to know going into it to be able to do it safely and not get burned on the back end of the deal, and also set you apart of your competition that is too afraid to go after this type of property. So first, this is my why. Why do I do what I do? I'm a believer. I want to be enriched in every way so that I can be generous on every occasion, every opportunity, every homeless man I pull up beside, every waitress that I can overtip. That's my goal. I want to be wildly wealthy so I can be wildly generous all the time, so that obviously that generosity results in pointing people to Christ. So why flip manufactured homes? In most markets like ours, there is an abundance of them. There's a lot of opportunity. We all know a ton of neighborhoods around Brunswick County, Pender County, etc., that consist of double wides on individual quarter-acre to half-acre lots that the double wides are 20 to 35 years old. And usually there's a good handful, 10+% of those that are poorly maintained, and there's opportunity there. So that abundance of opportunity also helps with less competition, because obviously the supply helps reduce competition, the demand, I guess you would call it, but there's less competition of people that are interested in this type of property, and even in flipping them, most of the time just because they don't understand them. What I've found is most investors that have been flipping houses for a decent amount of time, they don't do manufactured homes for a few reasons. One of those is, you got to think 10 years ago, manufactured homes were selling for like $50,000 with the land. There was almost no value there. So it would be nearly impossible to, unless you got it for almost free, to renovate anything and actually create value. So that's one reason investors historically have stayed out of flipping these. But as everybody's seen in the last decade, the prices on these things have absolutely skyrocketed. So now there's plenty of margin, even on properties that were just bought at full retail price 3 and 4 years ago. There's often plenty of margin to make deals work today with these. Another reason there's less competition is a lot of investors, even very experienced investors, don't realize that after you renovate these and you list them for sale, that they can qualify for financing if the buyer's buying it as their primary residence. A lot of these investors and flippers just assume, because it's a manufactured home, that you will only be able to sell to a cash buyer, or you'll only be able to sell or finance it to somebody. That's not the case. If somebody's buying it as their primary residence, they can get conventional mortgages on it, USDA, depending on the years, VA, FHA financing, pretty much all of it. So because of the lower price point, these are typically, at the after repair value of most of these around our area are usually somewhere between $200,000 to $275,000 typically. And because of that, they're usually fairly easy to sell. Even if some of the higher price points are moving slower, these low price points, because they're basically about as cheap as what you can find. So some people, that's all that they can qualify for when it comes to getting approved for a mortgage. So their low price point also means there's lower risk to you as the investor getting into it just because of the dollar amount. If something goes wrong, whether you're using your money or a lender's money, losing $80,000 potentially on a trailer is a lot less painful than losing $800,000 on a beach house that you're flipping. And they're also pretty easy to repair and renovate. That's another objection that I've heard from experienced investors, that one reason they don't get into it is because they say, well, we've just never really done that before, and the guys that we use to do the work, they don't really work on those. They don't have experience on that, and I feel like that would be a problem. Well, it's not. They're so easy to work on. They're easier to work on than stick-built houses. I can tell you, just as an example, if I were to go to a retail plumbing company and ask them to give me a quote to replumb a stick-built house, they're probably going to say anywhere between $12,000 to $20,000. Well, on a manufactured home, the retail price plumber is probably going to be closer to about $6,000, maybe $7,000. But whenever you're an investor and you've got people that can do work at more competitive prices, you can find plumbers to replumb a double wide still fully permitted for $3,500. So there are a lot of major expenses that can be pretty cheap when it comes to manufactured homes. What is a manufactured home? Manufactured home is factory built, permanent residence on a chassis. That's important. You see this metal frame right here, the big metal steel beams, and they are built to HUD standards, and they are installed on site. So one of the biggest misunderstandings that I see in this space is 99.5% of people have no idea what the difference between a manufactured home and a modular home is. Even the large majority of realtors and lenders that I talk to don't understand the differences. So what are the differences? So manufactured, it is, like we said, regulated by HUD. It's initially has a vehicle title, as long as it is post-1976, because it wasn't until July 15th, 1976 that HUD started regulating these. And side note, when I said that these are financeable to retail buyers buying them as primary residences, that is not true if they were built prior to this year. So that's important to keep in mind. So modulars do not ever have a title. Manufactureds, if you have a single wide trailer manufactured home, that typically is going to have one title and it's going to have a VIN number on it, just like a car would. A double wide will have two titles, one title for each half of the home that's being transported, and those titles will typically have serial numbers on them rather than a VIN number. So modular homes are a bit different. Modular, they are built off-site just like manufactureds, but they don't typically have that metal chassis underneath, and they're not regulated by HUD, so whenever they are put onto a permanent foundation on land, modulars have to abide by whatever that local building code is, which is often why modulars are overbuilt in a lot of cases. They'll usually have 2x6 exterior walls, and they'll put extra bracing and things and stuff just to make it easier for them, that they know it'll meet code in a whole bunch of different places. So manufactured, it just has to meet the HUD, which is a federal regulation. Modular, they have to meet the local building codes. Now, when manufacturers are set up, they still have to have the appropriate work done on the foundation, securing it, to abide by the requirements for the specific wind zone that the property is in, because there are different wind zones for different parts of the country, depending on where you're doing this. So modular is not considered personal property ever. There's never a title. It can never be taxed like a vehicle, whereas manufactured is initially taxed. It's personal property and it's taxed as a vehicle. You will initially get a property tax bill, just like you do for your car, on a manufactured home until you put it on a permanent foundation and cancel the title, which we'll get to in a minute. So like I said, it's built off site on a chassis. If a manufactured home is rolled into a trailer park, just and pays lot rent, and it stays on the frame, on the wheels, then it can be picked up and moved again. It can be hauled away and taken somewhere else. Modular, you can't do that. It was never on a frame, on wheels to begin with, so you can't just up and move it. And the biggest difference about modulars and manufacturers is when it comes to resale values and quality of construction type, when it comes to appraisals, modulars are considered of equal construction quality as stick-built houses, and appraisers should be using stick-built comps as such if there aren't specifically modular comps within that area, within that time frame. So that's a big deal, because you could easily flip a modular home that looks like a manufactured home and sell it for $275,000, and then later find out, oh, that was actually a modular. That means I could have sold it for $310,000. So there's a lot of opportunity to leave money on the table there, but there's also, on the flip side of that, a lot of opportunity for you to see value where others may not. I've had times where a wholesaler will bring me a deal on a modular home that they think is a double wide. They think it's a manufactured home. So they're comping it based off of manufactured sales. I know that it's worth at least $40,000 more than what the manufactured comps are showing. And so to me, it's a great deal. I'm going to jump on that as soon as I can. So never assume. Both of these are modulars. This is a home that I'm pending sale on right now in Rocky Point that is modular. It looks like a double wide. From the outside, you would think it's a double wide, but it's not. And there are ways we can get into to show you how I determine that. Because the other takeaway is, with this one, even the county GIS had it wrong. Even the GIS had it listed as a manufactured home, as a double wide. And so I had to get all the paperwork from the prior owner that clearly showed that it's a modular home and submit that to the GIS rep with the county so he could get that updated so that we didn't have issues when we resold it. This house is actually my house in Rocky Point. It's a modular home, but it's 2 stories, 6 bedrooms, 3,600 square feet. I don't know about y'all, but until we found this home, I had no idea that modular homes could be that big or that. I mean, even though this was all built off site, it probably had to have been built in 6 or 8 different sections and then brought in and all put together. So manufactured homes, are we investing with them on individual lots, or are we investing with them where they are still mobile, where we do not own the land? I personally do not touch them if they do not come with the land. I only buy them if they're already on the land. And to me, that there can be money made on buying a trailer that needs to be moved or is in a trailer park somewhere and selling it for more money or flipping it or whatever. To me, the headache involved, especially if you've got to move and set stuff up, The juice isn't worth the squeeze, in my opinion. But plenty of people do it and do pretty well with it. So all I do is focus on flipping them when they're on their own individual lot. So when a manufactured home is put on a lot, it has to be put on a permanent foundation. And it's funny because back to most people not knowing anything about these, I've come across countless times where a lot of realtors, lenders, and other folks in the industry don't even know what a foundation is on a manufactured home. And a lot of them think that the skirting that you see around the edges, which is typically brick, but it can also be cinder block or it could be just vinyl. A lot of those folks think that that's part of the foundation. It's not. That's skirting. It's not holding up any weight. Hence why you can have vinyl skirting. So foundation needs to be on pier and beam. So the piers are cinder blocks typically. You can also have, real thick treated wood. I've only seen that once so far in all the ones that I've done. Always it's cinder block piers. It's on a crawl space, or you can set them on top of a basement, but obviously we live at the beach. We don't have basements. So I've never dealt with that. You have to remove the wheels, the tongue, or if it's a double wide, there'll be 2 tongues, and the axles, and it must have some form of skirting. It can be, the brick or block that you're used to seeing. It can be vinyl. It can be, some people use decorative wood of some sort. As long as there's something there to keep rodents and pests out from underneath the trailer. That's the whole purpose of it. So, which is why if you have vinyl skirting, it needs to have some sort of just basic 2x4 treated wood frame behind it, so that it's not just loose vinyl sitting there that a possum can go push up underneath it kind of deal. So, and when I say you need to, I'm saying you need to if you want to make sure that it qualifies for financing for your retail buyer when you sell it on the back end. So most of the time, all of this stuff has already been done before I bought it. But on occasion, there's something else that needs to be done. Like maybe everything was done, but there's not currently any skirting. Or maybe everything was done, but they never removed the tongue off of the end of it or something like that. So occasionally we have to do a little bit to get this within compliance. But most of the time, all of this is done. Once it's on a permanent foundation, you have to record an affidavit of affixation or declaration of intent to affix to real property with the Register of Deeds. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. So this is the form that you would file with the DMV to cancel your title once you have put it on a permanent foundation. It is it's MVR 463, I believe. So once you have a trailer that is on a permanent foundation and you want to get it to where it can qualify for financing on the back end, you have to make sure that there's no active title with the DMV, which is why if there is an active title, the title needs to be taken to the DMV, signed by the owner with this form. There are plenty of times where we buy a trailer that's on land from somebody where there is still an existing title in place, and hopefully the seller has that title on hand and we can just get them to sign it over with this form and get that title issue cleared. Sometimes if they don't have it, we may have to have them request a replacement title first, and then we can do that part. But the way that this shows up, how you know if that's an issue, if there is an active title or not, is when the closing attorney does his title search. So when the closing attorney gets the information from the data plate, which I'll show you an example of in a minute, it will have the serial or VIN number on the data plate. They will run that in this DMV system, and it will tell them whether or not there's an active title. And if there's not, they'll spit out a letter that says that there isn't. So this is an example of a declaration of intent to affix the manufactured home to real property. Once you have canceled the title with the DMV or confirmed that it has already been canceled at some point, you record this document with the county that you're in. And disclaimer, I forgot to say earlier, everything I'm telling you is only within the realm of North Carolina. I've not tried to do this in any other state, so if you try to, get some second opinions. So, well, hey, get some second opinions even if you do it in North Carolina. So this is what gets recorded with the county, and what you're telling the county by recording this is this property is now on a permanent foundation. It is no longer considered personal property. It is no longer being taxed by the state as a vehicle for property tax, and I am now giving you as the county permission to consider this home as real property with the land as a real structure, as real estate, and thus tax me more for it. Because before this gets recorded, more than likely you're going to be paying property taxes to the county for just the land, not the actual home. But you'll still be paying personal property taxes for the vehicle taxes to the state. But once you record this, that changes. So this is an example of a data plate. This is important when you're buying one of these. It's typically either going to be found on the inside of a kitchen cabinet, often underneath the sink in the kitchen. And if not there, the second most common place is about chest level in one of the bedroom closets. And it's a full-size sheet of paper that's just glued to the wall. Now, sometimes those aren't there because people have, scraped them off before they painted, or they replaced the kitchen cabinets and didn't think to save that or something. And we'll go over what to do when that happens in just a moment. So, and this is just a zoomed in screenshot from this section up here. This shows date of manufacture, the HUD label numbers, and the manufacturer's serial number. So this is the number, this is what the closing attorney will need as part of his title search. So that begs the question, what if the data plate's missing? What do you do? Because you need to get clear title on the building as well, not just for the land. So if the data plate is missing, you can usually, and unless the exterior siding has been replaced at some point in the past, there should be 2 of these metal HUD tags. Or if it's a single wide, it might only have 1. Double wide should be 2. There should be 1 of these tags on each one. And they're typically, when you're looking at a home, they're going to be all the way at one of the corners and only about a foot up from the bottom of the siding, typically. So what you can do is take this number here off of this HUD tag, and you can go to ibts.org and use this, and they'll ask you like one other question, like what city was it in and what was the year of manufacture. If you don't have the data plate, you may not know the manufacturer, date. So I would just go by whatever public records say is when that house was built. And sometimes that might be off by like 1 year, but that's fine. IBTS still is able to find it by that. But you pay around $150 to get IBTS to search their records. And if they have a copy of the data plate in their records, they will send it to you, and then you can get it over to your title insurance or your closing attorney. Some closing attorneys are really good and know this information and can help you through it and can order it through IBTS. Some are less helpful or less knowledgeable, but when you're buying these, this is just a regular thing you're going to want to look for. And if you run into an issue where you don't see a data plate, and you can go ahead and jump in front of things and order a replacement through IBTS, it'll make your life and the closing attorney's lives a lot easier. So if they can't find one in their records anywhere, they can issue you a compliance certificate instead, which in every experience of that I have had, has been just as sufficient for the attorney for obtaining clear title and getting title insurance on the property. So remember, we mentioned this date of July 15th, 1976, when HUD started regulating manufactured homes. If a home was built prior to that, it will not have these tags because these are from HUD. These are HUD tags. So, next question. What if the HUD tags are missing? What if somebody replaced the kitchen cabinets? There's no data plate. They replaced the siding at some point. There's no HUD tag. Well, it gets a little trickier. If you have searched the public records, you've searched the previously recorded documents from prior owners, you've checked the description on the legal description at the bottom of the deed, and you've checked to see if anything else in the past had ever been recorded with the county that might have a serial number, a VIN number on it. If you've already checked that and you don't find it, then this is just about your last resort. On the frame where the tongue is, or if this was a double wide, there'd be 2 tongues. There is often, but not always, either a painted or a engraved or sometimes slightly raised serial number or VIN number on the frame itself that sometimes when you can go under the house and you can see it. Now, one really hard part about that is sometimes if there is brick or cinder block skirting along the edge, that skirting might be 3 or 4 inches away from this frame. So there's no way for you to fit your head up against there and try to see it. Your best bet, if anything, is maybe taking some kind of remote camera in there with a flashlight and looking like that. So that is one way that you can find the information that you need to be able to get clear title. I have had, so far in my experience, 2 double wides where I was not able to find anything previously recorded with this information. There was no data plate, there was no HUD tags, and from what I was able to see, could not get this information off of the frame. In those 2 instances, I had to back away from the deal. I didn't buy those because I knew if I bought them, my only option would be able to sell it to a cash buyer without title insurance, because you need to find this to be able to get clear title, which is a requirement for a lender when you're selling it to somebody else on the back end. So some potential disqualifications for financing. When you move a property, if you already have a double wide or single wide on a permanent foundation, and then you move it off of that onto a different permanent foundation somewhere else, that immediately disqualifies it from every type of financing except for VA loans. It's my understanding that if it's been moved once, a VA loan can still be used as a primary residence to buy that property. If you have moved it twice, that disqualifies it from VA loan as well. Now, the thing about that is, how are they going to know? If it was moved, if it was put on the initial foundation 30 years ago, and then 15 years ago it was moved, that's been there long enough. They're really unlikely to see any evidence of something having been moved recently and actually question that. So it really comes down to the appraiser that the lender sends out there, and if there are any red flags that the appraiser catches. If the appraiser has some sort of suspicion that it has been moved at some point, or if there are any public records anywhere that indicate that that's a possibility, then they might have more questions. They might want to ask for some other sort of documentation. But I'm not saying to take that chance, because it's definitely not worth the risk. But if you were in that situation, I'm not exactly sure how they would know unless it was moved within like the last couple years or so. Unless they went back and looked at previous years of like Google satellite image or the satellite images on the GIS county website, potentially. But an appraiser's not going to go do that unless he has some sort of reason to, some suspicion. So another thing, any additions that are built on the manufactured homes, I used to think that additions completely disqualified them from being financeable as a primary residence, but that's not true. I learned within the last year that they can still qualify as a primary residence, but they're pretty strict on the requirements for that. If there's an addition, the addition has to be self-supported, so it can't be putting any weight onto the manufactured home itself, because that would jeopardize the structural integrity of the manufactured home. And it has to be what they say structurally sound as well. So what's going to happen if you buy one with an addition on it, when you go to sell it to a buyer that's using financing, that appraiser is going to see, because 9 times out of 10, it's really obvious when there's an addition onto something. It just looks a little bit out of place or juts out of the side somewhere. And so an appraiser, when they see an addition on one of these, they're going to throw up a flag and require a structural engineer to go out and look underneath it and make sure that it does qualify as structurally sound and not jeopardizing the structural integrity of the manufactured home. Now, here's an example of that. This is a double wide in Hampstead that I sold just a couple months ago. It had this big like sunroom addition thing here, and they cut 2 open doorways into other parts of the house from this room. Well, obviously this is an addition, so the appraiser, I believe this was a FHA buyer. You may not have as many concerns with the conventional mortgage appraiser, but particularly with FHA and VA, it can become more of an issue. So the appraiser said, hey, there's an addition. The lender said, okay, there's an addition. We need a structural engineer to go out and review it. The structural engineer went out and reviewed it, gave us this report, and they said it's not jeopardizing the integrity of the home, but it's not structurally sound the way that it is. They said you need to go in and put additional bracing, choose one of these 3 options, along the piers and joists, and there was a couple other things that they required us to have to do as well. And then once we sent the photos after we were done, he was able to use those photos, and I think really he was probably supposed to go back out there but just didn't want to. But either way, he used the photos that we sent him and then generated us a new report that said it was structurally sound, and that cleared that issue with the lender. Additional inspection things to keep in mind, or rehab tips. It's super common for manufactured homes to have a decent amount of rotten or squishy subflooring in different spots, particularly those crappy little windows, if that's what you want to call them, that they put in them, especially any of them that are more than a decade old. You often will find soft spots in the subfloor on the inside right in front of that'll probably have to be cut out and replaced. A lot of times around anywhere else where there could have been a leak for any amount of time, like near a water heater, near a kitchen sink or bathroom vanity, something like that. And sometimes even if there's a lot of moisture in the air, or if like their HVAC system is too big for their property, so it's creating more moisture than it should, you could have some swelling of the subflooring around all of your floor vent registers as well. It's not usually something that's crazy expensive to have repaired, just something to keep in mind and be on the lookout for, feeling around for soft spots, especially around toilets. We almost always have to redo subfloor around toilets in these things. Some of these items, these repair parts, are not sold. A lot of them are not sold in your big box stores. So if you need a bathtub faucet for a manufactured home, your faucet and handles, you're not going to find it at Lowe's or Home Depot more than likely. You're either going to have to search online, which I'll say in the last 5 years, there's been a whole lot more options online of finding this kind of stuff, which has been super helpful. But other than that, you're stuck to local mobile home supply stores. The one in Wilmington that we utilize the most is Discount House down there off of, I don't know if you consider that College or Carolina Beach Road, whichever, out there, almost to Carolina Beach. they've got all kinds of stuff, even stuff as particular as the interior door hinges. You know, you're not going to find those interior door hinges in the big box stores, or if you do, they're going to be absurdly expensive. They're going to be like $20 for one pack of 3 hinges, whenever you can probably just get something that is comparable on Amazon for like a fifth of the price. When you're selling to a buyer that's using VA or FHA loan, there may be other requirements that that lender requires on the foundation itself, such as the cinder block piers underneath it that are actually holding it up. Sometimes if those don't have mortar in between the cinder blocks like they should, the engineer that goes out could say, hey, this needs to be coated in Surewall, which is just a brand name for a like fiber reinforced cement. So basically you'd have to pay guys to mix up a bunch of bags of this stuff, drag it in totes underneath there, and smear it on the outside of these piers, which typically runs about $2,000 or so to have that done, labor and materials. And likewise, there may also be other requirements to do additional strapping. So if FHA says you need to have sufficient strapping to protect it from moving this direction, but also from moving this direction or this direction, then that report may come back and say, well, we need you to add 4 longitudinal straps before this can qualify for an FHA loan. And that often is somewhere around another $2,000, $2,500 as well, in my experience. So there's potential there, depending on how it's laid out, and also depending on what the rules are for FHA and VA loans at that time, because this stuff changes pretty regularly. And it's quite annoying, actually. But just something to keep in mind, that when you get an offer in, when you're selling one, and it's an FHA or a VA buyer, if we're trying to negotiate, I will often use that as a negotiation tactic, and we'll say something, we'll counter their offer and say something to the extent of, okay, well, we'll give you this and that, or we'll do that price, but we're not going to go lower. But if anything else comes up foundation-wise that needs to be done to meet the requirements for your client's loan type, which is the fault of your client because they chose that loan type, I didn't choose that for them. If it costs more money to get the foundation up to speed for your client's loan type, we'll cover the costs of that if you agree to the price that we want. And a lot of the times they end up going with that, and you get lucky and you don't have to do anything else, and so you just saved yourself an extra $2,000 or $4,000. But sometimes you do end up having to do additional work, but since you were already aware of it on the front end, you were able to work that into your negotiation. Because I'll tell you what will happen if you don't do that, and then you get a report that says you got to add stuff to it, and it's going to cost you another $2,000. At that point, you've already negotiated the price and repairs and whatever. That buyer, if they're using FHA or VA, they're probably broke. They don't have money. They're not going to be able to bring money to the table to help pay for those improvements that need to be done. So if you don't go into this ahead of time knowing that that's a possibility for it to cost you more money, then you're going to agree to a worse price and then end up having to pay more money out of your own pocket, because if you don't, since they can't afford it, you're probably going to lose them as a buyer. They're going to back out. Now, obviously, they could always try to negotiate with you and say, hey, we'll cover half of the $2,000 expense if you cover the other half, or something like that. But more than likely, their agent's going to say, sorry, they're already tapped out between the money they spent on the due diligence and earnest money deposits and all the inspections they had to pay for. They don't have any more cash right now. So then you have to determine, well, do I just eat this cost, or do I lose this buyer and go back on market? One other little construction concern thing to keep in mind when it comes to these manufactured homes is gray plumbing, polybutylene. If you see a solid gray plumbing like this, that you cannot see through it at all, it's not translucent, then it's more than likely polybutylene. And an extra giveaway is usually in this writing, it'll say PB somewhere. But polybutylene was used not just in manufactured homes, but particularly in manufactured homes back from the late 70s all the way through the mid 90s. And this plumbing is terrible. It was banned at some point, like mid 90s, and now houses that still have this plumbing is falling apart. It's crumbling. There's leaks everywhere. If you try to just play whack-a-mole, patching one leak and another, you're going to cause 3 more leaks just because you touch stuff. So and buyers agents know this, home inspectors know this, and they're going to make a fuss about it. They're going to find that on the home inspection report and ask you to replace it or give a credit to replace it. So if this is something you know to look for ahead of time, you can negotiate a better purchase price so that you account for this in your budget. And the easiest thing to do is when you're walking through a house, just look under all the kitchen sinks and all the bathroom vanities and just look and see what color the pipes are that are coming up out of the ground. Obviously, you don't look at the pipe that is connected directly to the faucets because that's just a supply line going from the faucet to the fitting. You want to see the color of the pipe below the fitting. And occasionally, if the plumbing was done really well and there's a nice fitting and a flange right there, you may not be able to see the color of the plumbing sometimes right there. So if you're able to, pull up a little bit on the fitting to get it to come up, if there's any wiggle room, and see the color of the plumbing, or you can check underneath the house. If any of the insulation underneath has been cut open anywhere, you may be able to see some exposed plumbing there to look at. But I always look under the kitchen sink and both vanities every time, because since this gives you so many problems and people are constantly doing repairs, you may very well look under a kitchen sink and you see bright blue and red plumbing underneath that kitchen sink and think, oh great, this has PEX, we're good to go, no polybutylene. And then you go to you fix stuff, you go to resell it, home inspection report shows up it has polybutylene plumbing because that part that you happened to look at was the only part that was repaired and replaced with modern materials. So I like to check all of the sinks underneath just to make sure, because I may or may not be speaking from experience on that example. So one other little thing I'll note on that is that there was a type of PEX, which is a more modern, good quality plumbing, that I have seen in some like late 90s, like early 2000s manufactured homes that almost looks gray sometimes, but it's not. It's like a white or an off-white, but it's translucent. You can kind of see through it a little bit. That is not to be confused with polybutylene. Polybutylene is going to be solid, can't see through it at all. If you're looking at manufactured home that's older than 1996, then this is something you want to be on the lookout for. Anytime I'm buying one earlier than 96, I'm making sure I always check that. If it's later than 96, you're probably fine. If it's 2000, I'm probably not even going to check. All right, so last thing I want to leave you guys with tonight is just a small little motivational story of the potential of what you can do with something as small as a single wide trailer. This is a single wide trailer on land that I bought in Leland a few years ago from a wholesaler for $15,000. I have no idea how he got it that cheap. I didn't ask. I bought it. I didn't even have $15,000. I borrowed $15,000 from somebody else so I could buy that. I intended to keep it as a rental because there was a tenant in there that was supposed to be paying rent. Well, just a few months later, I think about 4 months after I bought this property, I came across this gorgeous 8-unit in Burgaw. It's a 2000 build, all 2-bed, 2-bath, almost 1,000 square foot units. Beautiful, beautiful property. And I was able to negotiate a price of $450,000 on this when if rents were a little bit higher to market rent, at the time, I think the value would have been around $900. So I basically got it a turnkey 8-unit for 50% of value, which by itself is an incredible deal. It recently appraised this year, because I'm doing a refinance, at $1.15 million. So what I did, the way I bought this, because it was $450,000, I used a local credit union to do a commercial mortgage for 20% down, 20% of $450,000, $90,000. What did I just say? I didn't even have the $15,000. So where am I going to get the $90,000 from for the down payment? Well, I told this seller over here, hey, Mr. Seller, do you mind if we set the closing for 90 days out to give me time to sell another property I own so I can do a 1031 exchange into this property? It's like, yes, I understand what you're trying to do. No problem. Absolutely. So that's exactly what I did. I got this one under contract for a 3-month close. I then sold this one. I could not for the life of me get the tenant out of it, or I could have sold it for closer to about $120 or so at that time, which, mind you, I didn't have to do any work to this property. That's just how great of a deal it was. But I couldn't get that tenant out, even offering a lot of money cash for keys so I could clean it up and sell it for more. So I had to sell it with the tenant in there. I ended up selling it to a cash buyer for $98,000. Now, after paying realtor commissions and closing costs and whatnot, my proceeds on that sale was just over $90,000, which was the exact amount that I needed for my 20% down on this property. Now, this property has, I don't know, $800,000-$900,000 worth of equity in it and is cash flowing about $4,000 a month. And I'm in the process of doing a cash out refinance on it, even at the current interest rates, where I should be able to pull out between $300,000 and $300,000, and my cash flow will only decrease by about $2,000 a month because of that. So that is just a small taste of what's possible. This is my contact info. You can. I've got a Bigger Pockets profile. I was also honored to be a guest on the Bigger Pockets podcast a little over a year ago, episode 851, if you care to listen to it. I'm on LinkedIn, although I don't really use it that much. Instagram is probably the best place if you have any interest in keeping up with what I do. And also, if you want to get up with me about anything, whether you've got questions on something or you want me to send you a copy of these slides, or you've got a deal to bring, or you want to potentially be a private lender on some of our projects, whatever it is, you can find our website, capefearcashoffer.com, or specifically for the private lenders, if you go to jvwithjv.com, it'll take you straight to the investors tab of that website where you can fill out your information. But you can also skip all that and just text me or email me too. So with that in mind, that's it. Hope you guys got something out of it. Yeah. Good question. So the biggest giveaway is the modulars almost never have the chassis. Modulars, you look underneath, there's most of the time not going to be a big steel frame underneath it. That's the easiest way. Now, in the one example that I gave, that I had that modular on this side of the screen that looked like a double wide, that one actually did have a steel beam underneath it, and it, quite frankly, it confused me. When I was looking at it, I thought at first it was a manufactured home, but then the seller was telling me, like, no, this is modular. And there were some other giveaways, like how the roof was structured, the ceiling on the inside and stuff, that should have been another giveaway that it was modular to me. But another giveaway was the fact that there were no HUD tags on the siding anywhere. And I, from what he had said, was under the impression that the siding had never been replaced. And if there were no HUD tags and there were no holes where a HUD tag would have previously been riveted to the siding, then that's another indicator. But in that particular example, the nail in the coffin was the paperwork that the owner had. He had the paperwork from the manufacturer that very clearly stated it was a modular home. Yeah, so these, if we do a typical renovation where we're often LVPing the whole house, painting the whole house, replacing appliances and light fixtures, and maybe a few miscellaneous repairs, you're depending on the square footage, anywhere from around 1,000 square feet up to 2,000-ish square feet, you're going to be around that 195,000 to 280,000 for these ones that are already existing that we're flipping. Now, new construction ones that are brand new manufactured homes put on land, you can maybe add another 30 to 50,000 to those numbers. But these existing ones that are over a decade old already, that's about the price point. And also to give you more just context as to why this can be a great opportunity for you is because of the lower competition, you're often able to get great margins and often better margins than with stick built. I don't look at a manufactured home unless I'm going to make a net profit of at least $40,000 conservatively. Most of them are making closer to 50 to 60. Some of them even a lot more than that on occasion. Sometimes we get a big home run, it's 80, 90, 100. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah, I would say for that example of a renovation that I gave you, we typically are running somewhere around 30,000, give or take $5,000. Maybe you're at 40 if you had to replace the roof and the HVAC as well. Maybe you even hit 50 if it was in really bad shape and you had to replace the entire kitchen and you had to gut the bathrooms. Now, those are my prices that I'm talking, which are good, cheap labor. Retail, my 30,000 would probably be 42 retail, and my 60,000 would probably be 80,000, with a retail contractor, if that helps. You think I'm doing work myself? when I'm No, valid question though. I mean, even if you think back to when I started, even back then, I didn't, because I had a day job, I had a wife, and I had at least 2 kids back then when I started. Now I have 5, and so life is kind of crazy, and I make a pretty firm stance not to work evenings or weekends, except for the occasional real estate meetup, and it works well. It works well. But and I'll say too, on that note, a lot of times having those time constraints or other constraints, like even as simple as when I started, I didn't own a truck. I just had a tiny car. Well, I was annoyed by that because that was all the time. I was like, man, if I just had a truck, I could, take this thing or load this up or haul this off or whatever. But looking back, I learned that those constraints were actually a blessing, the time constraint and the car restraint, because it required me to delegate that stuff out to other people. And if you want to actually do this full time and you want to create a business around it, that's what you have to do. If you're just trying to do it as a hobby and do a little side hustle, then yeah, maybe you can do it all on your own as you get time. But if you're trying to actually grow a business and have a team, have stuff running on its own at some point, you gotta delegate, gotta outsource. It depends a lot on where we're at construction-wise with the current crews, because contractors are an ever-evolving problem with flipping houses, and you may have some contractors that you work really well with for years that all of a sudden fall off the wagon or start taking advantage of you in some way. And so there are plenty of times where things can get delayed for reasons like that, or you have one crew that's a little less efficient than others. But for the most part, we're typically getting materials delivered. When I say materials, we will order the appliances and light fixtures because I don't trust contractors to pick that out. And we'll have that, and we'll throw in the toilets on the delivery too, just to spare their back. Other than that, the contractor knows where to go to buy exactly what kind of flooring, exactly what paint color we use on almost every single flip. We do the same thing. And so they source all that other material other than that little bit that I just mentioned that we have delivered. So typically within the first week of closing, we have materials delivered on site, and then usually our guys will get started within about a week of that point, and they're usually 3 to 4 weeks on the actual renovation itself. Even really 4 weeks is a lot of time for them. So even on the ones that are kind of bad, where we're like fully gutting the bathrooms, having to take it down to studs and everything, even those we're typically able to get done within about 4 weeks. These days, like I said, that can change at any given moment. But we're really trying to make an effort to continue that speed and keep that consistent right now with how hard it is to sell things and how long properties are sitting on the market. We have to expect a longer amount of days on market. So if we can get a project completely finished, cleaned, and listed for sale within 2 months of when we bought it, that's ideal for us. That's the sweet spot. That gives us 4 months to get it under contract and get it closed. And that also gives us leeway and leverage on negotiating. We're not just going to start cranking the price down after 14 days or even after 30 days. For the most part, I'm waiting 45 days before I even consider a price drop because I just expect them to take 30 to 45 days to get under contract, which is not bad. It's just we're so spoiled of how hot the market was, prior to a year ago, that we want everything to have multiple offers day one and go straight under contract. So now that we're not in that market, we just have to account for that, And also, if we have a project where we have if it's say like a 4,000 square foot house that's going to be a $250,000 rehab or something, I'll probably go ahead and set like a 12-month term on that hard money loan rather than the typical 6-month term. And what was the other? There was another reason I was going to give for. Oh yeah. Also, sometimes if we get too much deal flow at one time, obviously I'm not going to pass up on those deals. I'm still going to buy them, but I may not be able to get a crew started for 6 weeks or 8 weeks sometimes. If that happens, if I foresee that happening, the pipeline's getting a little too full, then I'll go ahead and start getting some of those hard money or private money loans set at like a 9-month term instead of a 6-month term, just to account for that and make sure we've got enough extra leeway in there. Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? So I'd say roughly half of my deals come from wholesalers that I've met at meetups like this, wholesalers I've met on Facebook groups. The wholesalers that now, because of the volume that I've been doing, there are wholesalers now that are finding my information online because when they're using software like PropStream or InvestorLift or other things like that, where they're looking for cash buyers in a certain area, and those softwares are filtering through public data to see who bought a property for a certain price and resold it for a certain percentage higher than that within a certain amount of time frame to where it looks like a flip to that software company, then they will like assign you a certain amount of like points or something as a cash buyer, give you like a ranking. And so some of these wholesalers that are out of state that just get some random occasional one-off deal in our area that they don't know any buyers in this area, some of them now are just finding me and bringing me deals, and that's been really cool. So to answer your question, for the other half of the deals, those come from our own marketing channels, which we do a lot of different things. We don't do any direct mail. We did a few years back, but right now we don't. We do PPC, so Google pay-per-click ads. We do social media ads, Facebook and Instagram. We do SEO work. If you search, you do a Google search for Sell My House Fast Wilmington or Rocky Point or Leland, my website almost every single time is going to be the #1 search result underneath the sponsored ads. And also often the first search result on the sponsored ads because we're doing PPC a lot of the times too. So PPC, SEO, what else did I say? Social media ads, and I'm also just in the process of starting some radio ads as well. So gonna test that out, see how it goes. It might be a complete flop like me doing the billboard was a couple years ago, but you don't know if you don't try. But yeah, there's a million different ways to find deals, and at the end of the day, they all work. You just gotta pick a method or a few methods and do them. Yeah, no, that's a good question. However, I don't buy them if they're not already on a foundation.
Oh, okay.
I only buy them if they're already on a foundation. Now, sometimes they may be missing skirting, or they may still have the tongue attached or something, and we've got to pay a little bit to do that. At that point, I just have to decide what type of skirting do I want to do. Do I think it's a nice enough property in a nice enough type of neighborhood where spending $4,000 to $6,000 on brick skirting is going to be worth it and give me my value back on the resale? Or do I not think that? I think it's a little bit more poorly maintained neighborhood, lower quality, and I can just do cheap vinyl skirting for $1,000, $1,200, and sell it that way.